Welcome back, guys, to another roundtable. My name is Adam. With me today, Rusmin.
Hello.
Victor.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us once again. And today we're going to talk about China Evergrande. So this has been in the news. I think it's almost everywhere. If you go to YouTube or financial news, this could be China's Lehman Brothers moment. So I think this company, it's a property developer, and they all have liabilities of about $300 billion US. It's quite a lot of money.
Yep. That's the size of the Singapore GDP.
Okay, that's quite
Almost
a
the
bit.
size
If you put
of
it
it.
that way, that is
Yeah.
a lot of money. So I think a lot of this has been covered so far, but I think we want a really quick recap of what's happening with China Evergrande really quickly, what's happening up to now, and what's going on.
Yeah, so I think let me give you a quick introduction about Evergrande first, right? So the problem now, I think a lot of articles have been written about Evergrande, and one common thing that come out is that they actually owe 1.5 million apartments to the people who actually invested in those homes in China. Okay, so that 1.5 million, just to give you a relative comparison, that's the entire residential home market in Singapore.
Okay.
Which is basically the entire Singapore that they owe to.
So basically, this property developer is having some financial trouble. Evergrande, right?
Yes.
And they're saying they have 1.5 million apartment units they've yet to develop and build.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that is the same size as all of that in Singapore.
Yes.
So can you imagine like all of us in Singapore just having no homes?
So that's the kind of size that we are talking about, right? So that's why I think a lot of articles are writing about Evergrande. It could be the next Lehman Brothers collapse, right? And that will trigger a big financial crisis. That's why there's a lot of talk about it. But if you look at the China Evergrande, in terms of size, I think they're pretty big. But if you compare relative to China GDP of the amount of money they owe, right, it's about 300 billion, and that is about 2% of the China GDP, right? So relatively, it's considered small, but we can't, in terms of size, it's still big. Right, because China is huge, right?
Yep.
And so if you look at the Evergrande, the history of the company, right? The company actually, most of their sales actually come from sales of properties, right? So they build homes in China, they buy land, they construct it, they sell it, they keep repeating this process. Okay, so as the property prices in China continue to go up, they continue to grow, right? So in China, I think they always say that if you're a developer, it's always about scale, right? You want to grow big, fast, but this is a highly capital-intensive business, so it requires a lot of capital. So this is a company that took on a lot of debt to grow, and they are probably the most indebted property developer companies in China, number one. They are also the largest in terms of sales, by sales, right? And basically, if you look at the 2020 numbers, 97% of the revenue actually come from sales of property, right? But there is a problem with this model because property development is a cyclical business, right? So a lot of developer that I have actually looked, in Singapore or in Hong Kong, they are a lot smarter, right? They started with development business, they make a lot of money, they started to diversify into commercial side where they start to build recurring business, because this is important that when the time of crisis, it can help to tide through the crisis. But this company doesn't seem to do that. They actually diversify into other non-core business, like they bought a football club, Guangzhou Football Club, using the company money. They diversify into EV, electric vehicle business. Anything that China government wants to do, they are there to support Chinese government. Right? So EV is one thing that they wanted to do. And of course, they also go into a lot of business like dairy, grain, and oil business. And at one point of time, they also tried to do pig farming.
So anything that's not with property, they've somehow gone into that.
Yeah.
Instead of staying within property and, like you're saying, developing rental properties to have a consistent source of income.
Yes,
Right.
But maybe those amount of money could be a lot smaller for them, because about the revenue still come from property development, right? 97% as of 2020. And if you look at the past 10 years, the revenue has grown from 50 billion to about 500 billion. So it's huge, right? The amount. But if you look at the profit, it's actually very volatile, right? So this is a business where you really want to make sure you have a recurring business, right? Which is your investment properties or rental income and stuff like that. But this company doesn't seem to have it. They do have it, but it's very small amount. It's negligible, right? And you look at the cash flow, out of 10 years that they have, I think only 2 out of 10 years positive cash flow, right? I mean, this is the kind of company that you want to avoid at all costs.
So it's burning cash almost every year.
Every year, yeah, because it's capital intensive, and that is a company that we won't invest. But somehow it has gotten so big that it's too hard to ignore. That's the reason why I think the Chinese government started to come in and started to clamp down, because they have so much in debt, and the model that they have been using over the last 10, 20 years is not sustainable. And look at the amount of debt they have grown is quite crazy, right? Yeah. So the amounts as of today, they owe about 300 billions that's total liabilities, right? In terms of debt level, is actually a lot lower. It's about, I think, 700 billions thereabout. But it's still a lot of money that we are talking
700
about.
billion in renminbi.
Yes,
Right?
that is
The 300 billion is actually in
USD,
dollar. So
yeah.
the actual conversion is about 89 billion
In debt.
in debt.
In
USD.
debt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the monies they owe to the bank, the trust, and of course some of the deposit that the investor actually put in their money, right? So there is a big problem now that we have to deal with, right? So Evergrande, basically, they have gotten so big with too much leverage, and now government is looking to control the property prices in China because it has rise so much, right, over the last 10 years. And if you look at the price index, mega cities have almost doubled. All right, countries, the top tier 1 city in China, and then large cities also has about appreciated by 50 to 75%. So that kind of property prices in China has gone up. Chinese people love properties.
I think
Asians
Asians in general
Asian.
love
Asian love
property.
properties,
So Singaporeans here as
Yeah.
well. I think we love property as well.
Yeah, I think for China, some people, I heard that they even divorced to buy more properties.
Oh, okay.
Forced divorce, right?
Like
Because they are limited to buy 2 homes
Yeah.
in China
Yeah.
for per household. So what they did was basically they divorced.
yeah.
But they are not, on paper they divorced, but they are still couple, right? But they can buy more homes.
Yeah.
That's to the extent that Chinese people will do. And China government actually clamped down on that recently because they don't want people to speculate, right?
Yeah.
The CCP already said that house is for living, not for speculation. Yeah, so this is something where I think they started to introduce the 3 red lines. Yeah, so I think Victor want to share the 3 red lines.
Yeah, so basically the criteria for the 3 red line is that there's 3 things to look at: liability to asset below 70%, net debt to equity below 100%, and finally the short-term debt to cash below 100%. So if you look in terms of Evergrande case, right, the first half 2021, right, their liability to assets is about 76%, way above the 70% mark. Then their net debt to equity is about 118%, above the 100% mark.
Yep.
And also the short-term debt to cash, right, is 277%, which is way higher than the less than 100% mark. So I think because of this 3 red line, right, it creates, all this saga, because they in the past they have been, borrowing to grow their business.
Yeah.
But right now, because of this, right, they cannot borrow. You need to pass these 3 criteria, then the banks can lend you money.
Yeah. So actually, the last few years, the government actually already noticed that these developers are having too much debt on their. That's why they started to introduce the 3 red lines. And in 2018, actually, the PBOC already dropped a hint that they're going to warn these people that the Evergrande and Fosun and H&A, they have too much debt on their profile. So they wanted them to commit to deleverage. That's why they introduced these 3 red lines. So over the last couple of years, you are seeing a lot of property developers in China are starting to sell their assets, non-core business, and then just to basically to meet these 3 red lines. If they cannot meet these 3 red lines, they are not allowed to borrow more money. That's the problem. And as Evergrande, I think because they couldn't do a fire sales for their homes, and in fact they tried to sell their property at a discount, 30%. Then competitor will also follow the suit, right? But Chinese property, the whole home market is actually quite substantial to the Chinese wealth. Okay, so government doesn't want to see the property market prices started to collapse because of this developers trying to clear the asset just to meet the 3 red lines. So they go to them, they tell them that you need to clear an asset, but you cannot do it at the expense of the property market. Right? So they, in a way that they now have to do it slower. Right? So as they do slower, a lot of their debt started to come due, and they couldn't have the money to pay those loans, the interest. So they started to default on the interest payment on the bonds, and of course subsequently, some of the interest that they sold, some of the wealth management product they sold to the investor at double-digit yield. Yeah, because they couldn't get the loans from the bank. Yeah. So now they actually sell some of the wealth management product to some of those retail investors.
And I read it was 13% interest, very high.
Very high, yes.
Yeah. So
about 70,000 people actually bought the product.
Okay.
Now, of course, they things started to collapse. Price of Evergrande started to come down, and then there are a lot of news written about Evergrande that it's going to default, it's going to collapse. People panic, so they started to go to the headquarters and then started to protest, asking for money back. And then there are some people. I saw one lady that threatened to kill herself if she doesn't get her money, right? And some even collapse in the middle of protest, right? So I mean, people are. property is a big asset, right? Big ticket items, and when someone put their money in that, it could be their life saving, a fortune, right? So if the money disappear, is almost like their entire life will disappear, right? So that's something where I think that's what we are seeing now. That's why there are a lot of panic about Evergrande, and I think in the financial market you see that it actually started to collapse, right? Not just Evergrande price, the whole retail sector, real estate sector, HSI real estate index actually dropped by close to 30%. Yeah, so it's quite a big drop. It dragged down the whole sector.
All right, so just to kind of like summarize this part, is basically Evergrande has been growing on steroids. They've been just taking a lot of debt, trying to like grow as fast as big as they can. But because of these three red lines that the Chinese government has come in to kind of like control this growth, this runaway growth on debt.
No, they cannot roll.
They can't roll over the debt. So that these debts, they're going to come due. Interest payments and all that.
Yes.
And they basically cannot just cover them.
So far, that means quite a few already. So I think that's why the news got accelerated quickly over the last couple of weeks.
So because of this whole thing is kind of like collapsing right now and kind of like in slow motion in a way.
Yes.
So people are just kind of seeing what's happening. And there's a lot of panic because in a sense, this is the biggest property developer in China. And China's population, a lot of their wealth is in property.
Yes.
So this kind of like, how much is it?
Just to put in the context, I think the Chinese, based on the 2019, I think about 66% of property of Chinese wealth is tied to property.
So property is a big thing.
Big thing, right? I think as the price has appreciated, it's probably has crossed 70%.
Okay.
Right? And the US, just to give a comparison, US home ownership, or rather property as the equity value of the person is usually 24% only.
Yeah. So a lot of Chinese people have their wealth
tied closely
to property. So I think because of this, the size of Evergrande, the fact that they could default and go bankrupt, and they owe 1.5 million homes as well.
Yes.
There's a lot of uncertainty in this market, and then the question now is basically if this collapses, right? What's going to happen? Is it going to be a Lehman Brothers moment for China? Is the government going to step in? And if they do, how are they going to do it? So what do you think is going to happen after, if this whole thing just kind of like unravels?
I think it's not really apple to apple comparison with Lehman, right? I've read one article, this person just wrote it here, like the first difference is Lehman was a top tier investment bank that was very good reputation. Then in the end, because of the subprime, they become bad, right? But then on the other hand, Evergrande, right, was very well known in the Hong Kong capital market for being very bad.
Okay.
Right? So their reputation has been bad for many years already. Right? This debt issue has always been there, has always been a talk in Hong Kong or in China and all this. Okay, so that's the first difference. The second difference is I think the mainstream media overblow this debt situation. Okay, because initially if you go and look at all those articles, right, they wrote 300 billion in debt. But it's actually 300 billion in liabilities, right? But the debt level, the bank, the loan is only 89 billion. But if you compare back to Lehman, right? Lehman at that point of time, right, is very different. Lehman is very different from China Evergrande because Lehman is financial assets. China Evergrande they own physical assets, right? So if you look at Lehman Brothers at the point of time, right, they have about 613 billion in debt, over 639 billion in assets. Whereas if you look at China Evergrande, it's about 89 billion in debt and 368.2 billion in assets. And out of the total assets, right, 220 billion, right, are assets of their lands and housing project that they have not completed. And on top of that, if you talk about their land reserve, right, they have about 231 million square meter of land reserve. So all these land reserve actually worth some money, right? So it's different from Lehman. Lehman, those are already dropped until really cannot, no records.
So you don't think it's going to be like a Lehman in that sense?
Yeah. Okay, so if you look at the company, right, they have about 19 billion in offshore bonds. Right, so that's in US dollar dominated. So 19 billion, I don't think it will shake the US economy.
Yeah, but is it going to shake the Chinese economy? I think that's the main question.
I think it's definitely going to shake the Chinese economy if it really collapses. Right, but I think the government is doing something to prevent it. Right.
Yeah. So basically, we talk about the collateral, the asset is backed by hard assets, which is the property,
real
hard assets. Right?
Right?
So this is the important part. If the hard asset, the property market in China were to collapse, this hard asset will practically become worth lesser as compared to before the crisis. So that's why government is actually playing a very active role in this market, and they have been so far clamping down on the debt level among the property developers. Even though Evergrande is trying to clear the asset at a discount, the regulator actually comes to them and says that you cannot do that by firing sales, because you will cause the prices of the property market in China to tumble. Okay, and if you look at the size of property, China housing market as relative to the GDP is about close to 10%, and if you take into account of those property construction and development side, it's going to come out to be about 70% of the GDP, which is quite big in terms of numbers. So China government wouldn't want that to go down, especially if you being commercial side, it's going to go up to 30%. Right. So China government is trying their best not to make sure that there was going to be a panic in the property market. So they are trying always cooling measures, trying to curb the leverage limit for these developers and all that. So this is something that I think they have been actively doing. And Chinese government also tell Evergrande that to prioritize the home construction, make sure they deliver those homes to the people who actually bought them, so that there will not be a catastrophic kind of event in this market.
But of course, I think if the whole property market to collapse in China, then that may be another Lehman, right?
But that would be worse than Lehman.
That would be worse. That would be kind of like another revolution in China. We know that's not going to happen.
Yeah, but the government is, that's the one thing. The government have control over all these banks
they're not
and
going to let
lending,
that happen.
right?
Yeah.
But the thing about Evergrande is, right, it's not say that they don't want to pay up their debt or pay up their interest. They are also in a sort of a catch-22 situation. Right. So I read one article, they talk about, they have this land that's worth 1 billion yuan, renminbi yuan, right? So then this land value is actually worth they bought at cost 1 billion, but now the value is 2 billion. Yeah. But those people who want to help them to, because they are cash strapped, right, they want to give them some money and buy over the land, right? They offer 300 million. Yeah. So it don't make sense for them to sell, right? And on top of that, like what Usman has said, the government said that you cannot sell at a very low price and push out the whole property market. So they are in sort of a catch-22 situation.
Even if they wanted to sell to raise the cash, they can't.
Yeah.
You're saying that.
Because everybody's trying to, get a very low price.
Yeah, that's the nature of the reality. When you need the money, they're going to squeeze you dry.
I think probably that's the reason why they missed the first payment on the bonds, but you have not default yet. You have to wait 30 days and we see how.
Yeah. So the demand for real estate homes in China will stay, right? Just the supply side, they're making sure that it still be there, not under supply. Once you're under supply, you're gonna make the whole thing worse. The China housing market could go a lot higher, more expensive. Right? That will create a bigger bubble for the Chinese government. Right? So I think among the banks in China, I think the government already told them that to extend some of the loans, and Chinese government already hire financial advisor to help with restructuring of Evergrande crisis. So this is a company that is going to fall, but it's going to be a control. It will not go into a tailspin. In my opinion.
Yeah, and also there's a 26th September, they came out with news that several local government in China actually set up a special custodian account right, for Evergrande, right? So is to protect the funds. Right? They make sure that they will direct these funds to build a house.
That 1.5, those 1.5 million units that still be
so
be developed.
This amount of money, right, is all freeze down there, frozen down there, right? Yeah. So that's why they still have to sell their property, but yet everybody is trying to lowball them on the property.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So do you think there's not going to be a bailout? Basically, the Chinese government is not going to bail this out.
I think the government stated that they're not going to bail them out.
They're going to bail out because there are other property developers also cross the 3 red lines they are working on to reduce the debt. Yeah.
So what's going to happen is they're not going to bail them out, but they're going to basically control the fallout. Yeah. So they're going to let them kind of like default, but they're going to control what's going to happen next when that happens. They're going to make sure that the homes are delivered to the people, so the 1.5 million homes, and then the rest of it they're going to do for some way of restructuring the debt.
I think the bondholders will probably have to lose money, trust that invested in their loans and the bonds, and also the equity owners, and some may even get back their money through the properties that swap.
Actually, by right, based on the normal corporate world, they should pay off the senior loan first.
Yes.
But now the government forced them to go the other way. You build the home first.
You have to prioritize the customer first.
Common prosperity.
Common prosperity. So like the Chinese government's philosophy in the sense. So they want to protect the common man over, I guess, the capital holders and all that stuff. So I think they're trying to. I think that's what's probably going to happen, because I think the Chinese government is not one that's going to just let things get out of control and then just see things kind of like implode in their own country. So I think we're probably going to see that. Well, I mean, nothing's 100% certain, but this is probably what's going to happen. So I think the next question is, I mean, if you're an investor right now in China and seeing all this is really, really scary. Lots of uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen. And what would you do? Like, I think we've covered Alibaba and Tencent. We are like shareholders in those companies in China Tech. So how do you think this is going to affect China in general, or specifically in China Tech and the other investments that we have?
I think as an investor, you got to make sure that all this news that you're reading is actually quite scary. And that initially, of course, the idea here is to create panics, although the writer doesn't have intention. But as more people write about it, more people will get panic. Right? Look at those people who invested in Evergrande homes, they start to get panic. The supplier also get panic because they don't get paid and all that. But as an investor, I think if you don't have investment direct exposure to China property development sectors like Evergrande or maybe some of the peers, right? I think you shouldn't be worried too much because all these are noise. Although they may, trigger another financial crisis that is worse than Lehman Brothers, but you should not make decision based on all this macro news, okay? Because what people have written is a lot of them are quite hypothetical, right? Mm-hmm. The worst case scenario, right? But as an investor, you need to ask yourself whether those companies that invested like China Tech, for example, Baba or Tencent, would they be affected? If the property market were to collapse, will people still stop shopping from Taobao, for example, for Alibaba, or will people stop using WeChat for Tencent? Right? If the answer is no, people will still continue to use, then the fundamentals doesn't change.
But there could be a recession in a sense.
There could be a recession.
I mean, if this property collapse really happens, then of course the Chinese economy is going to slow down.
Yes.
That would still affect China Tech in some way.
In some way, the whole economy will slow down.
But it wouldn't basically wipe out that sector at all. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, because in any major financial crisis, most companies, if not all, will be affected.
Yeah.
Right. But it's just that the degree of the serious the impact will be different. Right. For China Tech, I think it's a very minimal impact.
I think just focus on, let's say if you're really afraid of Evergrande, this thing really happened, the property market really blew it out.
Yeah.
Then focus on stocks that are not related to all this property.
Right. Consumer
it's
staples,
like just how COVID, right? During the COVID time, we invest on companies that are not related that will grow stronger, when the COVID was over.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think COVID was basically a global event, affected so many companies, but then there are some companies that just were not affected by COVID. And some actually benefited from COVID.
In fact, COVID is supposed to kill a lot of companies, right? But what the government did in Singapore and in China, they actually make sure the bank continued to finance these companies so that they go into trouble. Even if their debt were to mature, extension comes in, and a lot of these actually survive. So nowadays the crises are actually more controlled in a way.
So I mean, they will let things fail, but they're not going to just let things go out of control. So they're going to let it fail and gracefully in a sense.
In fact, the next big crisis will not be the Lehman type of crisis. It will be something different.
Something unpredictable. We wouldn't know about it. Right?
Usually a crisis will only happen when we are not prepared for it.
Correct.
If everyone is expecting it to happen, it won't happen.
Correct. That's true. So basically, a crisis is something that you just wouldn't know. Catch you by surprise, basically. So if you are basically Alibaba, Tencent, maybe the Chinese tech, I think that's more popular among our viewers, among people in general. In China, if you're looking at the Chinese stock market in general, what would you do if you're a shareholder of these companies at this point in time?
Do nothing.
Do nothing.
You can read the news.
But of course, if it drops, because let's say if the housing bubble really bursts, then buy more.
Really? Buy more?
For me.
So make sure that you are diversified. So if you've got a percentage allocated to China, and of course that is something that you're comfortable to have exposure in, right? Okay. So for us, we will continue to add, right, if the prices are attractive enough for us to invest.
So what you basically just kind of like keep the news in sight to see what's happening. Just try to follow what's happening, but then you wouldn't really kind of like panic of your portfolio around because you believe in the long-term fundamentals of the companies that you're investing in. But you don't think there's a direct hit on these companies.
I think the more you panic, the more you make wrong decision. You have to really go back to fundamental.
So basically, if you invest in any companies that have no relation to property sector in China, I think the rest are noise. News.
All right. So I think that's a pretty good wrap up of this China Evergrande. I think we didn't really want to cover it so much into China Evergrande. There's so many videos and articles out there about China Evergrande. We give you a quick recap. But I think the gist of this is how would this basically affect your portfolio? I think that's what we really want to cover. So I think for us, you've noticed, we've been on our past roundtables, we've covered a lot on Alibaba and Tencent, basically a Chinese tech, because I think we think those are really dominant companies in the Chinese ecosystem, and we just don't think that this property Evergrande thing is going to affect them too much. But it could affect the overall.
Short term, yes, but long term, I think they should do fine.
So we do have a very long term perspective of our investments. So that may be different for you, so you got to decide for yourself as well. Okay, so I think this is a pretty good wrap up of the China Evergrande crisis. I hope that was a good update just in case you're worried about it. So once again, my name is Adam, this is Rusmin. Victor,
Thank you.
so much for joining us, and I hope this roundtable really helped you out as well. So if you like our content and what we're discussing, please hit the like button, let us know we're doing a good job, and of course subscribe to our channel. Many more roundtables coming up as well. Of course, any questions or comments about this whole situation in China at this point in time, feel free to ask us as well. We'd love to have a discussion with you in the comment section. So once again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you around again.